On September 30th, 2025, the Black Sea coast near Ochakiv. At 2:17 a.m., the water looked harmless, but Ukraine was already moving. Ukraine launched Bayraktar TB2s to track every convoy, sent Switchblade 600s to blind sensors, and armed Magura V5 sea drones to strike. Russia stood guard with Pantsir S1 and Tor M2 batteries while Black Sea Fleet logistics waited for resupply. The reason was simple and ruthless. Every 72 hours, more than 2.5 million gallons of diesel and about 300 tons of ammunition flowed through this single port to feed the southern front. Ukraine's objective was surgical and cold cut the vein and make the guns fall quiet. From 12,000 feet, Bayraktars painted the map. At 100 miles per hour, Switchblade 600s lunged at radar and relay masts. 5 miles offshore, Magura V5s skimmed the waves at 42 miles per hour, carrying 700 pounds of explosive inside carbon shells, light as a family car. Russia's defenses looked up to the sky and missed what slid along the sea. This is the night when precision challenges power and silence challenges fire. If a single command could change a coastline, would you press it or wait for morning? Before we dive in, subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next chapter. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are watching right now? At 2:17 a.m., September 28, 2025, on Ochakiv coastline. This wasn't chaos. It was calculation. Ukraine's high command had one clear objective: cripple Russia's southern war machine by cutting its bloodstream of fuel and shells. Every 72 hours, more than 1.2 million gallons of diesel and 400 tons of ammunition passed through this coastal hub, enough to keep the guns near Kherson firing for days. Shut it down, and the entire line would suffocate. From Kyiv's underground war room, under the watch of President Volodymyr Zelensky, the plan took shape. Intelligence from Bayraktar TB2 drones mapped the convoys, while satellite feeds tracked the rhythm of supply ships crawling in at 12 miles per hour. The mission had a single code name: Operation Drought, a strike not for glory, but for survival. Russia believed the port was untouchable, guarded by Tor M2 and Pantsir S1 batteries, backed by jamming towers that hummed like metal giants in the fog. But even the strongest fortress rots when its heart runs dry. Ukraine wasn't coming to destroy everything. It was coming to make the enemy run out of breath. If you were in that command room, would you take the shot? Or would you wait for the storm to pass? 4:05 a.m., September 29th, 2025, Kyiv Underground Command Center. While the city above slept, the air below buzzed like a live power grid. Dozens of monitors cast cold blue light across the concrete walls, streaming real-time feeds from Bayraktar TB2s, Switchblade 600s, and R-18 recon drones. Every pixel was a pulse from the battlefield, every flicker a whisper that something was about to ignite. At 15,000 feet above the Black Sea, Bayraktars traced convoys crawling toward the coast. Switchblade teams armed warheads barely 50 pounds, yet accurate enough to vaporize a radar mast from 3 miles away. Along the wall, engineers ran final checks on Magura V5 sea drones, each carrying 700 pounds of explosives. Gliding through simulations at 42 miles per hour, the silent hunters of the deep. At the center of it all stood the head of Ukraine's military intelligence, calm, focused, his voice steady. His command was simple: see everything, strike nothing until the moment is perfect. This wasn't luck. It was geometry, patience, and the quiet before thunder. If you were in that room, would you wait for that perfect second or press launch and rewrite the night? 11:46 p.m., over the Black Sea. The air was thick, damp, and electric. Out there in the dark, 12 Bayraktar TB2s hovered like patient vultures, engines whispering at 120 miles per hour, invisible to radar but close enough to taste the salt in the wind. The operation had begun. Ukraine did not start with explosions. It started with illusion. The first strike was not made of metal, but of data. Over the coastline, Bayraktars released decoy signals that danced like sparks on Russian radar. Each flicker looked real enough to kill, forcing Pantsir S-1 operators to twist their turrets and lock on to ghosts. Within 20 minutes, they had fired away $6 million of missiles into empty air. Then came the second act. From the southern horizon, Switchblade 600s raced forward at 100 miles per hour, hugging the sea just 15 feet above the surface. Their targets were not soldiers but senses, radar dishes, thermal scopes, and relay towers. Each warhead carried only 50 pounds of C4, yet every impact struck like a steel hammer on glass. One after another, Russian outposts went dark. The radar screens didn't go red, they went blank. Inside a command truck, an officer barked orders through static. The screens flickered with dozens of phantom blips that weren't drones at all, but reflections, mirror echoes bouncing from the Bayraktar's jamming pods. It was like watching your own shadow turn against you. Panic spread faster than gunfire. Within 40 minutes, the coastline was chaos. Multi-million-dollar defenses chased light instead of threats. Infantry units sprayed tracer rounds into fog so thick it swallowed the sound of their own fear. The Black Sea shook with the noise of men shooting at ghosts. And under that madness, the real strike force moved. 4 Magura V5 sea drones skimmed the waves 5 miles offshore, cruising silent at 42 miles per hour, barely 2 feet above the water. Their guidance systems used optical gyros and fiber link relays that spoke no radio language. To Russian jammers, they simply did not exist. At 12:23 a.m., one Magura rose just high enough for its camera to catch the shadow of the target, a coastal fuel station feeding the main port. The operator miles away whispered 2 words into the mic, "Eyes on." The onboard computer measured distance, wind, and tide with the precision of a heartbeat. The other drones spread into formation, a perfect triangle drawn in darkness. Inside the Kyiv command center, the chief coordinator exhaled slowly. His voice was calm, steady. They're blind now. And with that, deception became control. Out in the fog, machines and myths became one. The drones were no longer tools. They were the idea of strategy made real, cold, and brilliant and unstoppable. If you had been there, watching a superpower waste its fire on shadows, what would you feel? Shock? Admiration? Or the quiet fear that the future of war no longer belongs to strength, but to imagination? 12:47 a.m., September 30th, 2025, the Black Sea. The water was flat as glass, and the fog thick enough to hide a city. For hours, the Russian coastline had been blind, deaf, and drowning in static. Now, the silence cracked. From 5 miles offshore, 4 Magura V5 sea drones began their final approach, engines humming at 42 miles per hour, each carrying 700 pounds of high-explosive inside carbon fiber hulls lighter than a family sedan. Above them, Bayraktar TB2s hovered at 12,000 feet, sending a live feed through Starlink uplinks that Russian jammers still could not touch. The screens showed panic across the port. Searchlights clawed at the fog while men shouted into radios that no longer spoke back. They had built a fortress and locked themselves inside their own confusion. The target was the Ochakiv fuel complex, a maze of tanks and pipes holding about 2.5 million gallons of diesel and over 300 tons of ammunition stacked like dominoes. One blast here would be more than destruction. It would be suffocation. Inside the Kyiv command center, the order came quietly but sharp. Go loud. A Switchblade 600 dove from the sky at 100 miles per hour, slamming into a communication tower beside the port. The explosion tore through the mist like thunder splitting a mountain. Russian guards panicked. Tracer rounds sliced the dark. It was the perfect distraction. The Maguras surged forward, skimming barely 2 feet above the waves. Their guidance systems blended optical sensors with inertial navigation, comparing the shimmer of every ripple to stored satellite maps. Even in pitch black, they knew exactly where they were. At 12:51 a.m., the lead Magura caught the thermal bloom of the target. 2 Tor M2 launchers guarded the harbor, worth nearly $30 million combined. But they were hunters of the sky, not the sea. The Magura slid through their radar beams like a needle through silk. When the first drone hit, The blast tore through a wall of fuel tanks with the pressure of more than 6,000 pounds per square inch, sending a column of fire 800 feet high. The second struck 8 seconds later, setting off the ammunition stacks. The reaction was instant. Rockets screamed upward, shells burst in air, and the ground trembled as if the sea itself was breathing fire. Miles away, windows shattered. The shockwave rolled across the Black Sea, painting the horizon orange. In Kyiv, sensors registered a thermal spike hotter than 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For 3 long minutes, the coast burned brighter than dawn. The third Magura, damaged but alive, hit the power grid and plunged the coastline into darkness. The fourth, running blind, slammed into a docked fuel barge and turned it into a floating inferno. Inside Russian command, disbelief replaced fear. Screens froze. Data feeds died. Multi-million-dollar systems were undone by drones that cost less than a single missile fired at the decoys earlier that night. By 1:20 a.m., the Ochakiv fuel complex was gone, a crater a quarter-mile wide filled with molten steel and burning diesel. The losses were staggering. More than $100 million in equipment, 2.5 million gallons of fuel, and 300 tons of ammunition erased in a single hour. No one in Kyiv celebrated. The control room stayed silent, lit by the flicker of the fire still burning on the monitors. The mission had done its job, not to impress but to prove that precision could defeat power. If you had stood on that shore, watching a sunrise made of fire, what would you feel? Relief? Horror? Or the quiet realization that war no longer belongs to size and strength, but to the mind that dares to imagine the impossible? 6:42 a.m. Kyiv. The smoke over Ochakiv was still climbing, thick and black, visible even from orbit. Satellite images showed a dark wound stretching a quarter-mile across the coast, where the beating heart of Russia's southern supply line once stood. The numbers were brutal. More than 2.5 million gallons of fuel, 300 tons of ammunition, and nearly $120 million of equipment had vanished in less than an hour. In Moscow, silence hit harder than the explosion itself. The Black Sea Fleet froze, its ships idle without refueling. Artillery output across the southern front fell by almost 40% within 2 days. Commanders blamed fog, then sabotage, then fate. None of it mattered. The front had gone dark. Across Ukraine, the reaction was electric. Enlistment in the security service of Ukraine and the main intelligence directorate jumped by nearly 25%. Villages near Mykolaiv raised their flags again. For the first time in months, hope outweighed fear. International networks called it the night the sea caught fire. Some saw a masterpiece of precision, others a warning from the future. If you were watching that sunrise from either side, would you call it justice or the birth of a new kind of war? When the flames over Ochakiv finally faded, the story stopped being about weapons and started being about people. Behind every drone, every glowing monitor, and every silent signal sent across the sea, there were human minds. Young engineers, pilots, and analysts who turned metal scraps into instruments of survival. They proved that modern war is not ruled by noise and numbers, but by creativity, precision, and courage. This was never about revenge, it was about adaptation. Ukraine did not have endless money or fleets of billion-dollar jets. What it had was ingenuity and the ability to turn limitation into strategy. That is the true strength of a nation that refuses to surrender. For Russia, the lesson was heavy. Overconfidence can blind faster than any flash of light. No fortress of steel, no wall of technology can withstand an opponent who learns faster than you can respond. What happened on the Black Sea was more than a strike. It was a mirror held up to the world. Power is shifting. The future no longer belongs to size or strength. It belongs to minds that can think beyond the expected. So when you finish this story, take a breath and ask yourself, what do you feel right now? Is it pride, fear, hope, or wonder? And one more question before we part. Look at the clock near you. What time is it where you are watching this? Because somewhere, at this same moment, another quiet room glows blue with screens. Another crew waits in silence, and another story of courage is already beginning.